One of the culprits and major causes of delays in digital transformations and project overruns is the fact that the teams aren't aligned. Internally, the organization is not aligned, beginning at the executive level all the way on down to the project team. But what exactly is misalignment and what does it look like when it works? That's what I'm going to talk about here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And one of the biggest types of consulting that we as a team do, and I personally do, is I help a lot of our executive teams with their executive alignment. Starting with, of course, the executive steering committee, but then working down to mid-level management all the way down to the front lines. That's such a big part of making these projects successful, is ensuring that everyone understands what direction we're going. And too often organizations think that this is just a technology project. How hard can it be? What is alignment? It doesn't really make sense. We're just deploying new technologies. Well, the reality is when you invest in new business technology, you're not just investing in technology, you're investing in completely new workflows, new processes, new capabilities, new skills requirements, new business decisions that you'll need to make. So everything looks different on the other side of your digital transformation, and you need to make sure that people are on the same page. Think of a large machine. You've got a machine that's humming, it's working really well, and all of a sudden you throw a bunch of sand into it. If you throw the sand into the machine, it's going to grind to a halt, it's going to overheat, might explode, create fire, a bunch of dramatic stuff like that. And of course, that's an analogy for what happens when your team is not aligned. When your team is not aligned, it doesn't matter what technology you're deploying. It doesn't matter how good of a software vendor or system integrator you have helping you with the technology pieces. It's going to fail if you're not aligned. And too many organizations underestimate this and don't understand what alignment means. So what I want to do today is talk about that from the executive level on down and really paint a picture of what some of those sources of misalignment are and what you can do to ensure that you stay aligned throughout your project. Now, if you'd like to learn more, especially if you're an executive and you'd like to learn more about how to make your project successful, be sure to read our executive guide to digital transformation. It's meant for executives. It's meant to provide that strategic view of digital transformation projects to understand from a business perspective, what do we need to do to be successful in our initiatives and how can we be successful in our change leadership efforts. You can read that book by scanning the QR code right here or go to the links below. Now, the first type of misalignment is strategic misalignment. And when you look at an organization's business strategy and then their tech strategy, you often find that there's a big disconnect here. The business strategy and the tech strategy don't sync up. I'll give you a quick example of what this looks like. Let's assume that you're a business that's multinational, you've grown through acquisition, you've grown organically, you've diversified your product lines and geographies that you do business in, and over time you've just created this sort of spaghetti bowl of different processes and data silos, different technologies, and to really scale for future growth, you know that you need to have a common set of systems, common set of processes, and a common way of operating. So you start to act more like one company. Well, that's fair enough. Let's call that our business strategy. We have a standardization and scale strategy. So this is really focused on driving consistency and scale, repeatability throughout your entire organization. And that's a solid strategy. A lot of our mid-size, high-growth types of clients pursue this sort of strategy. But where things break down, oftentimes, is they then go to deploy a new technology and they do something different. They start to customize the software. They take a best-of-breed approach, meaning they deploy multiple systems. They have a decentralized approach to the project. They allow independent tech decisions, meaning different parts of the business are deciding different things. And oftentimes they do this because that might be the current state culture, but the strategy to go forward is this. And if we have this sort of disconnect here, this project will fail. Or at the very least, it's going to be very underwhelming, the results that they get out of this project, because they're going to end up back to where they started and they're not going to get the standardization and scale that they wanted. Now, this is just one example. There's a million examples I could give you of how a business strategy and a tech strategy become completely disconnected. But that's the first step, is to make sure that you work with someone that can help you define what the best approach is and what the best tech strategy is before you start choosing and implementing different types of technology. So I've talked a little bit about how business strategies and tech strategies can become misaligned. But let's talk about how the organization itself and the leadership team can get misaligned. And this is something that's very common. So let's look at a few leaders within an organization. You've got a chief sales officer. You've got a CFO. You've got a COO. You've got a CIO. Let's just start with those four. Obviously, your executive team is probably a lot bigger than this, most are, but I'm just going to give you a few examples here. You've got a chief salesperson here that his main goal or her main goal is to increase revenue, hire better salespeople, et cetera, et cetera. You've got a CFO here who's focused on driving EBITDA. They want a faster period end close. They want to mitigate risk. That's a pretty common set of objectives for a CFO. You've got a COO trying to drive operational excellence. They want to drive efficiency. And they want to decrease inventory because they've got too much. It's too bloated. You've got a CIO over here who wants to leverage AI, wants consistent tech. Maybe they want an ERP system because managing one ERP system can be a lot easier for a CIO than managing 10 different enterprise techs. So those are just a few examples that we'll start with. But you can look here and look at these different objectives as an organization, and let's assume this is your steering committee. And by the way, of course, you've got your CEO up here whose job is to navigate all these diverse opinions and set the overall strategy for the organization. So we'll set aside the CEO for a moment and just look at that next layer down. And you can see that if we were to ask any one of these people, based on their objectives, what this project should look like, you're probably going to get 4 different answers. Chief of sales, their chief sales officer is probably going to say, let's put in a new CRM system like a Salesforce, and we'll try to use this world-class CRM tool to drive more revenue, to do more cross-selling, all that good stuff. CFO is going to think, well, I just want to increase EBITDA, so I want a cheap system. I just need something that's really focused on financials, really good at GL and reporting, all that good stuff. And I want something that's low risk. So that is right there already in conflict with what the chief sales officer wants. So you've got to resolve that potential misalignment here. The COO might be more focused on putting in a manufacturing execution system or some shop floor technology or warehouse management system to accomplish the goals that he or she is trying to accomplish. And then the CIO might be more interested in the latest and greatest ERP system that has a ton of AI in it. And you can see that these are 4 different paths that don't necessarily align, and you've got to figure out what the priorities are, which is where the CEO comes in. The CEO needs to be the one to define what the right path forward is and what the priorities are, so that down here, when we get to the project team, we have a clear vision and clear direction on what it is we need to deliver for the executive steering committee. Now, the problem is, a lot of times it starts with the CEO or maybe one of the other executives. The project gets approved, and then they push the project down and all the decision-making down to the project team without going through this exercise of getting alignment here, because we have to get this alignment, because what happens is this project team gets caught in the middle when you start seeing the crossfire of all these people that have conflicting priorities, and the person that's going to take the brunt of that is going to be the project manager and the rest of the project team, and certainly whoever the executive sponsor is, if one of these people is the executive sponsor. So we've got to have that alignment for the sake of making the project more efficient, less disruptive, less chaotic, less morale killing, because a lot of project teams will lose morale when they start to experience this, and that slows the project down even more. So this can turn into a downward spiral of a mess if we don't take the time up front early in the project before we get into the technology evaluation and decision. We've got to make these decisions and make sure we get on the same page and go through that messy process of getting alignment. It is going to be messy, but you might as well do it before the meter starts running on a big, expensive, risky project, and take that time up front to get it done right. Now, I talked a little bit about how an executive team can become misaligned at individual levels. But what happens when decisions get misaligned too? It's similar to this, but a little bit different too. What ends up happening is down here, the project team ends up making decisions based on what the vendor might be mentioning. So the vendor is going to have their own set of preferred practices. I'm not going to use the word best practices because it's a load of crap, but vendor practices are what I'll call them. It's just the way the software works. It's not good or bad. It's just the way it works. And they're going to have their way that they think the software should look without necessarily considering the overall direction of the organization. They're going to focus on what their software is good at and where the strengths are and what they're used to doing. So the project team and the vendor together typically will make a bunch of decisions, and they will drift off into a direction that either supports the way things already are at this organization, or it's the way the vendor wants to see the project work. And chances are extremely high close to 100%, that drifting is going to be totally inconsistent with what the overall executive steering committee needs or wants, which is why their involvement in the project is so important and why getting their alignment early before the vendors get involved is so important as well. And the reason this is so critical is because lack of decision-making or slow decision-making is, in some studies, known to be the #1 cause of project delays and budgetary overruns. The slower a company is at making decisions, or the more messy those decisions are during a project, the more things get pushed out, the more the meter keeps running, and you're spinning your wheels, wasting a lot of time and money while your team's trying to get aligned and trying to make decisions that they should have made a long time ago. So the more we can get this messiness out on the table up front, the better, but at the very least, we need to make sure we have our steering committee involved throughout the entire project, and I'll talk more about that here in just a moment. So the question here is, how and when do we get aligned? I'll tell you when you don't want to focus on alignment, and that is when you're midway through the project and you realize you're not aligned. That's probably the worst time for you to decide to do it. The ideal time is before you've gone out and submitted RFPs and gotten bids from software vendors. You've taken the time before you evaluate vendors to get that alignment, because that alignment is going to be critical inputs into the way you evaluate and prioritize the different technologies that are out there. If you start down here with deciding on technology, chances are very high you're not going to align with what the executive team wants. So we need to get this stuff done first, and that's why phase 0 is so important. Before you ever get too deep into a project, you need to make sure you do phase 0. You get the executive alignment in place, the business strategy and tech alignment, you get the project team aligned, the vendor aligned. Now you can start the project in a way that keeps you all marching in the same direction. And if you'd like more tips on how to get your team aligned and how to lead change within your organization, I encourage you to read our Executive's Guide to Digital Transformation and Change. You can read that by scanning the QR code right here or go to the links below. So I hope you found this information useful and hope you have a great day.